Israel Adesanya versus Hamza Chimaev must happen next, and it must happen at UFC 300. And let me tell you why. Now that Dricus Du Plessis is the champion of the middleweight division, you're going to see a bunch of casuals say Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis should be next. That's the fight that must happen next. Oh my god, it's such a huge fight. Mega fight. The return of Israel Adesanya, even though he's been out for less than a year. And I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. And now there's other people on the other side saying Dricus Du Plessis versus Hamza Chimaev. That's the fight to make next. Hamza Chimaev deserves his title shot. He just beat Kamaru Usman. And I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. And the reason why. Now, I understand that the people that are saying that Israel Adesanya should fight Dricus Du Plessis next are people that understand that it's a huge fight, that most likely that's where the UFC is going to go next because Israel Adesanya is still a big star and that fight sells. That fight sells. And as much as we don't think that Israel Adesanya deserves that shot because he really doesn't. I mean, he's coming off a dominant loss to Sean Strickland where he got beat from round 1 to round 5, even got dropped in the first round, and he looked terrible in that fight. And I know that Israel Adesanya was a dominant middleweight champion, but he had just been given his rematch against Alex Pereira in that second fight. And yes, he was able to regain the title, but that doesn't mean that every time that Israel Adesanya loses his belt, he can just wait and then get an immediate title shot just because there's a new champion. Like, that's not how championship works. And I understand that the UFC is going to do whatever they want, especially when, you have a big star like Israel Adesanya. Maybe if Israel Adesanya wasn't all that popular with the casuals, maybe they would think about giving him a fight before giving him a title shot. And I know that, something that I mentioned before UFC 297, before Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland, was that I felt that if Sean Strickland would have won this fight, they most likely would have made Sean Strickland versus Hamza Chimaev and still made Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis for the summer. And at least they're still able to make that huge fight between Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis. And in the meantime, they give Sean Strickland Hamza Chimaev. But now that Dricus Du Plessis, won that fight by split decision, it was a coin toss. I mean, it could have gone either way. The UFC is gonna try to make Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, and it should not happen next, guys. Hamza Chimaev is also a guy that people feel that he deserves a title shot. I don't feel that way. I mean, he hasn't fought a top 15 middleweight. He's coming off beating a Kamaru Usman, coming off the couch on a weight class that he had never fought before, and even that fight, in my opinion, was a draw or even a Kamaru Usman win. You could give the second and third round to Kamaru Usman. I understand you could give the first round a 10-8 for Hamza Chimaev, but in my opinion, it was a very close fight. It wasn't a fight to me that clearly stated that Hamza Chimaev deserves his title shot. If anything, kind of let me know that there's still a lot of holes in Hamza Chimaev's game, and he still needs a couple wins, in my opinion, to get a title shot. But I understand that because it's Hamza Chimaev, who's also a big star in the UFC, he might be one win away from getting a title shot. So in my opinion, he should either fight Israel Adesanya or Jared Cannonier. I think that would be a very interesting matchup for Hamza Chimaev. But I'm afraid, guys, that the UFC is going to make Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis for UFC 300. Let me tell you why that shouldn't even happen for UFC 300 if that's the route they end up taking. First of all, Dricus Du Plessis did take a lot of damage in this fight. I mean, he was clearly beaten up. His eyes were swollen. He looked like he had been in a fight. And 3 month turnaround to fight at UFC 300 is too short of a turnaround, and they're clearly doing this again. I mean, they did this and that after Dricus Du Plessis had beaten Robert Whittaker, they wanted Dricus to make a quick turnaround for UFC 293 in Australia. Now they're trying to do it again now that Dricus Du Plessis has become champion, and they want him to make a quick turnaround for UFC 300 against Israel Adesanya. And I'm tired of this Israel Adesanya Dana White privilege. We should get rid of it, and we need to make sure that Israel Adesanya does not get this title shot. I know it's going to be very hard. I know there's a lot of Israel Adesanya fans that are happy now. Yay, my little Izzy boy gets another title shot, even though he's coming off getting dominated by Sean Strickland. And if you're an Israel Adesanya fan that is celebrating the fact that Sean Strickland just lost to Dricus Du Plessis, you're a sad, pathetic man. You're a sad, pathetic child. The fact that you can celebrate another man's win. And don't don't be celebrating like if Dricus Du Plessis dominated Sean Strickland. Like, have some dignity, have some integrity. Really, you're gonna celebrate getting a coin toss win? These are not Dricus Du Plessis fans. These are just Sean Strickland haters, and that's the truth. That's the truth. And I saw a lot of Israel Adesanya fans celebrating this win like if it was their own, like if Israel Adesanya was not just dominated by Sean Strickland a couple months ago. So don't be that guy. Don't be that loser. But yes, guys, Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya must happen next for UFC 300. And I think that Dricus Du Plessis needs some time off. Look, I understand that the UFC is most likely not going to give Sean Strickland a rematch. It was a very competitive fight. The fight wasn't like a fight of the year, or it wasn't like this amazing banger. It was a decent fight, but it wasn't a fight where you're like, man, these guys need to run it back. Like, yeah, as a hardcore MMA fan, I want them to run it back to see who's clearly the better fighter, if it would be more definitive. But there's also a chance that it would play out the same way. There's a chance that their styles are just they just cancel out. So there's definitely that possibility. And like I said, the fight isn't a barn burner. And even though Sean Strickland has become a superstar, I believe he's become a superstar because of his personality outside of the cage, not necessarily because of his fighting style. So it makes it really hard. I understand why the UFC wouldn't necessarily want to give Sean Strickland a rematch, even though in my opinion he deserves it, especially because the fight was very competitive. And I don't know how I feel about Dricus Du Plessis winning the title off a split decision win, and where most people thought Sean Strickland had won most of those rounds, you know what I'm saying, especially watching it live. And I'm not of the opinion, I don't share the opinion that you need to rewatch the fight to then, if you have to rewatch a fight to then give the fight to the other guy, then in my opinion, I think most people would agree Sean Strickland probably won 3-2 rounds. Look, it was a very competitive fight. I'm not here to discredit Dricus Du Plessis or to try to say that it was a robbery, because I don't think it was a robbery, but it was a very competitive fight. If it was any other fight, they'd probably run it back, but I understand because it's Sean Strickland, because of his personality outside of the cage. I understand why the UFC, and also because Israel Adesanya is a big star, I understand why they're probably going to give Dricus Israel Adesanya next, but it's not the fight that should happen next, and it's not a fight that should happen anytime soon, in my opinion, because like I said, Dricus Du Plessis coming off a pretty hard fought battle against Sean Strickland, where he did take a lot of damage to the face. He was clearly very beaten up after that fight, and for him to make a quick turnaround for UFC 300, it feels like the UFC is setting up Dricus Du Plessis again. They're setting him up to lose against Israel Adesanya. And I hate seeing that, guys. And I have to call it out. This is Based MMA. Yes, I'm a big Israel Adesanya hater. And I'm going to trash him at every opportunity I get. And this is clearly one. And Khamzat Chimaev, as much as I want to see this guy fight for the title, after his last performance, nobody came out thinking that fight like, man, Khamzat Chimaev clearly deserves a title shot. And even though I think Khamzat Chimaev might be a little bit underrated now, and I still think he has a lot of potential, he still needs to show that. You know what I'm saying? He still needs to show that against proper middleweights, and he hasn't fought a proper middleweight. I understand that he fought Kamaru Usman. It wasn't his fault. Paulo Costa pulled out. It wasn't his fault. But let's be honest, like, he didn't beat Kamaru Usman the way he should have. And I understand that it's Kamaru Usman. I also think Kamaru Usman has become very underrated. But it was a Kamaru Usman that was coming off the couch. It was a Kamaru Usman fighting in a weight class that he had never fought before. It was a Kamaru Usman that was coming off 2 losses against Leon Edwards. You know what I'm saying? So there was a lot of factors against Kamaru Usman coming into that fight. And he was still able, in my opinion, to win the fight, if not pull a draw. In my opinion, the fight was either a draw or a Kamaru Usman win, because I gave the second round to Kamaru Usman, the third round to Kamaru Usman. Now, I understand why you could give that first round to Khamzat Chimaev, because it was a very dominant round, especially with the grappling by Khamzat Chimaev. So I understand that you could give him a 10-8. But like I said, it's not a performance that earns you a title shot. And in my opinion, the best, biggest fight you can make right now, one of the biggest fights you can make right now, I think this fight is even bigger than Dricus and Adesanya, is Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev, because the winner of that fight now earns a title shot against the champion, and the fight is even bigger, because if Khamzat Chimaev is able to beat Israel Adesanya, then Chimaev versus Dricus Du Plessis could be a big fight. Now, I understand that from the UFC's point of view, if they make that fight and Adesanya loses, you know, you kind of lose the opportunity to make Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis. But you have to make the best fight the best. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, Adesanya's stock isn't all that high. He's coming off losing to Sean Strickland. So, like I said, Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev is the fight that must happen next. And we look, I want them to make the Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis rematch. I really do. But I understand that the UFC is not going to go in that direction. I'd be very surprised if they give Sean Strickland the rematch. I'm pretty sure they're going to give Sean Strickland the winner of Whitaker and Costa, most likely. Maybe a Jerry Cannonier rematch. But I think the UFC is going to do their best to kind of silence Sean Strickland and not giving him opportunities. I mean, he's become a huge superstar, so I don't really see them throwing Sean Strickland back at the UFC apex. They're most likely going to put him in UFC pay-per-views now. He's a big star. He's a big draw, especially outside the cage. But even as a Sean Strickland fan, I have to be honest, he doesn't have the most entertaining fighting style. And because of it, I could see the UFC, you know, giving Dricus Du Plessis Israel Adesanya for his first title defense. And I gotta be honest, even though I would pick Dricus Du Plessis to win that fight, I could see ways that Israel Adesanya could beat him, because Dricus Du Plessis is very sloppy on the feet. And if Israel Adesanya shows up with Gyno, I think he could knock out Dricus, if I'm being honest. You know what I'm saying? We've seen that when Adesanya is the challenger, he fights differently and he fights to kill. So, you know, I just don't want to see Israel Adesanya regain the belt. And I really do believe that he needs one win to get back at the title picture. He's probably happy that Dricus Du Plessis won the fight, because I really did feel that if Sean Strickland would have won this fight, they probably would have given they would probably make Sean Strickland versus Khamzat Chimaev, and I don't think they're going to go in that direction anymore. I think they're most likely going to give Sean Strickland the winner of Costa, Whitaker, or maybe Jerry Cannonier, and then they're going to make Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis, Khamzat Chimaev fights the winner. I think that's the direction they're going to end up going next, which is not fair, but you know, nothing is fair in the UFC. It's all about what makes sense in terms of money, timing, and if you're a big star outside the cage. So I'm sad for Sean Strickland. I really hope they make Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev happen next. It's a huge fight. I mean, it's such a big fight that doesn't involve the title. Make it for an interim belt. I don't even care. Make it for an interim belt. I wouldn't even mind, but in my opinion, that's the fight that should happen next, guys. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you feel like Israel Adesanya should fight Dricus Du Plessis?